Hi, I'm Indra from IGM, and today I'll show you how you can use a CNC machine to make this beautiful wooden clock with an epoxy dial. Let's do it. Before using the CNC, I had to design my clock in VCarve software. I wanted the dial to be nice and simple, so I decided to have only the 4 main numbers. Here you can see a simulation of the machining process we are about to get into on the IGM E2R B22. I'll use two tools to make the clock. First, I'll carve out the dial with this lettering bit, and then I'll cut out the clock using a 6mm downcut spiral cutter. I added two supports around the clock. They are only 1.5mm high and 5mm wide. If I plan project without supports, the inner part of the cutout, in other words, our clock, will come loose when cutting the last few millimeters and the rotating cutter could destroy my clock. I prefer to remove the supports of the CNC with a fine hand saw or multi-purpose saw. I firmly secured an edge joint board on the CNC tabletop. This board will turn into my clock. The clock has a 350mm diameter, so the board should be larger to allow enough space. That's why the board is 450 by 450mm and 25mm thick. Then I insert the IGM lettering bit and import my data into the CNC control software. After that, I have to measure how high the bit tip is from the top edge of the board. To do that, I use this sensor and the adjust feature in our software. By clicking on this button, the tool starts to slowly descend until it touches the sensor. Now, the CNC knows the exact tool height. I'll set the X and Y axes by pinpointing the starting point of the project, which I set in the center of the board. Now, let's start the cycle and wait for the CNC to finish. During the cycle, I can adjust the feed rate or spindle speed as needed. The first step is complete. Now I'll replace the lettering bit with a downcut spiral cutter that will cut out the clock. I use downcut because it pushes chips down, making the top edge nice and clean, and I don't care that the bottom edge won't be completely clean. After replacing the tool, I again need to measure the height with the sensor and import the data. Then I just run the cycle and wait for the CNC to finish. I also cannot forget to do a pocket for the clock mechanism on the backside. It's done. You can see I've got two thin supports left here and the clock is still in the board. I cut the supports off with the CMT11 multi-tool. I'm going to sand the edges with a fine abrasive and mix the epoxy. I'll mix a clear epoxy with a hardener. This epoxy should be used in layers up to 4 cm thick and will cure for about 1 to 2 days. For the coloring, I use a black metallic pigment that creates a striking contrast against the light ash. When mixing, pay attention to the ratio of epoxy to hardener. The ratio is not by volume but by weight, so I'll weigh both ingredients with a small digital scale. I then mix both ingredients thoroughly with a spatula. I add the pigment gradually in small amounts, adjusting as needed to achieve a dark, well-contrasted dial. This mixture is slowly poured into the grooves. I'm careful not to create too many air bubbles. To fill the grooves, I use a syringe. Once the dial is filled to the edge, I use a hot air gun to force the remaining air bubbles out of the epoxy so that it is completely bubble free. I let the epoxy cure for 1 or 2 days. I'd rather give it more time, otherwise, I'd have to work with unfinished epoxy. Once the epoxy has fully cured, I sand the top of the clock in a drum sander. Then I finish sanding it with the eccentric sander using different grades until both the wood and epoxy are clean and scratch free. After sanding, I trim the edge with a 45 degrees chamfer bit. I drill a hole in the middle for a clock shaft on the drill press. Finally, I treat the entire clock with Osmo finish and I'm done. I can put the clock on the wall and enjoy a job well done. I hope you enjoyed the video. As you could see, making the clock is not as complicated as it may seem, and I'm sure you can do it too. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you later.